Bon appétit! Hey, Seraphin here, and I know you've probably seen a million bread recipes using garlic, but rest assured this video is going to be a little different. In fact, I might not have made this video if there were already a video on this specific subject. You see, most bread recipes with garlic involve putting garlic on the bread. I technically have one like that. And on the other hand, it's relatively rare to put garlic in the bread dough as an ingredient. And there are pitifully few resources talking about what adding garlic does to the bread. You see, a lot of people are adding garlic to their bread dough just because they like garlic, which is great. I love garlic too. But what troubled me was, what does garlic really do in bread dough, scientifically? I mean, everybody loves garlic, and garlic bread is insanely popular. So what is this dearth of information about garlic in bread online? I will not stand for it. So I looked at the science, and although the papers were pretty scarce, I found that the general conclusion is that garlic makes bread worse, in the sense that adding garlic to bread dough typically makes the bread come out denser and harder. But why? Well, some have suspected that it's about the yeast, as garlic is an antimicrobial and maybe it's killing off the yeast. But according to this study, that is not the case, or at least not the whole story. The study found that the addition of 1% garlic powder did nothing to the yeast, despite affecting the bread volume. It turns out that the garlic powder affected the dough structure. Yes, the structure that supports our bread and lets it rise. Adding garlic weakens the dough structure, and the cause of this weakening was thought to be an unidentified compound inside the garlic. Technically speaking, an alpha-beta unsaturated carbonyl compound. You don't need to remember that, but basically during mixing, these compounds are said to react with certain parts of the gluten network, resulting in a loss of elasticity of the dough and an increase in the viscosity. Ultimately, this weakens the dough and is likely part of why garlic in bread dough causes the bread to lose volume. In general, the more garlic powder there is, the denser and harder the bread becomes. Long story short, at this point, you probably think that it's a bad idea to put garlic in bread dough, right? But there's more to the story. So now let's talk about the benefits of putting garlic in bread and what we can do to still get good bread regardless of the negative effects on dough structure. Aside from adding flavor, one study in the Philippines found that adding garlic to the bread extended the shelf life of the bread by inhibiting mold growth. So garlic can sort of act as a natural preservative and prevent the bread from going bad. I will note that they used freshly crushed garlic though, and I'll talk about the difference between fresh garlic and garlic powder in a bit. When it comes to antimicrobial activity, one of the most important components of garlic seems to be allicin, which is also the component that gives garlic its distinctive scent. Now, allicin doesn't actually show up in garlic until you crush or cut it. So that's why whole garlic doesn't really smell of garlic until you cut it. The two components that make up garlic, an enzyme called allinase and a substrate called allin, are located in different parts of the garlic. When you cut into garlic, you damage the tissue and essentially allow them to mix together, resulting in the formation of allicin. This is actually a defense mechanism for the plant. We're supposed to recoil from that pungent odor, but in an unfortunate plot twist for the garlic plant, we like the flavor. So here we are today with garlic as one of the most important crops in the world. Regardless though, keep allicin in mind while watching this video because we're going to mention it quite often. Alright, so allicin's antimicrobial properties can help bread last longer, but that's not the only thing it can do. Allicin and flavonoids from garlic have also been shown to reduce the formation of acrylamide, which is a probable human carcinogen with well-demonstrated negative effects on animals. This study found that compared to a control bread without garlic powder, an acrylamide reduction rate of 45% was obtained by adding just 5 grams of garlic powder to a dough made with 500 grams of wheat flour. That is a very impressive reduction for such a small amount of garlic. The more garlic added, the higher the reduction rate of acrylamide. With that being said, the study did mention that at certain levels, the garlic powder content was unacceptable to taste testers flavor-wise. So what percentage of garlic is acceptable to people then? For this paper, the sensory panel consisted of 9 trained university students, and generally speaking, as the amount of garlic powder increased, their overall rating of the bread went down. Now, in contrast to that finding, in another paper, the overall preference for the garlic bread actually went up by a small amount when adding 1% garlic powder to the bread. Apparently, the color and flavor of the bread won more people over. This study had 20 university students serving as panelists and was done in Korea, so that may have had an effect on the results. It could be a cultural preference for more or less garlic, after all. Putting that aside, these 2 papers agree that beyond 1% garlic powder, people generally start to dislike the garlic bread more and more, citing the strong taste of garlic as a problem. And of course, like we already saw, the decreased volume and increased hardness. So it's probably best to cap the garlic powder content to 1% baker's percentage. But keep in mind that this is garlic powder, not fresh garlic. For starters, around 70% of fresh garlic is water. So garlic powder is much more concentrated than garlic. However, due to the drying process, the garlic powder you buy will probably end up containing less allicin than fresh garlic. Remember how we talked about allicin being made of 2 components in the garlic? Well, the enzyme allinase is actually denatured by the heating process, which naturally means that it can't work to produce allicin after being heated. The processing method can also significantly affect the allin, with some sources quoting 50% allin reductions in garlic powder compared to fresh garlic. So garlic powder, when mixed with water, probably won't produce as much allicin as freshly crushed garlic, especially if that garlic powder has been dried at higher temperatures. This is pretty important given that the 2 benefits of garlic bread that we talked about, the lowered acrylamide and increased shelf life, actually rely on allicin by quite a bit. So for this garlic bread recipe, I'm going to recommend using fresh garlic if you can, and we'll use the 1% garlic powder content as a rough upper limit, taking into account the water content of the garlic naturally. We're also using butter to help spread the garlic flavor throughout the bread. Again, this has something to do with the allicin actually, because allicin doesn't mix well with water, but it is soluble in lipids or fats, which is what the butter is for. The butter will help spread the garlic throughout the bread. The butter will also help soften the bread here, as well as improve the flavor. Now, last but not least, this recipe also has 15% Tangzhong baker's percentage. The gelatinized starch will help soften the bread and keep it soft for longer. It will also add a bit of natural sweetness. All right, with all that out of the way, let's start making the bread. Now, for a note on this recipe, while these garlic bread rolls do taste amazing, I also think the garlic flavor can be a bit overwhelming or too strong when the bread is eaten alone, especially if you eat more than 1 bun. But when you top the bread with some sausages or use it as a burger bun, that's where this garlic bread really starts to shine. It really complements the other ingredients, adding to the savory taste. So I recommend using the bread like this, and that's what we're going to be making here. Okay, the first thing we need to prepare is our Tangzhong and Poolish. I usually prepare them the night before I make the dough, giving the Tangzhong and Poolish some time to rest in the fridge. It really makes the bread taste better. We start preparing the Tangzhong first. I'll pour in 135 grams of boiling hot water into a bowl, and then add 65 grams of bread flour. Then we mix everything together. You want to make sure the water is boiling hot. If you feel like you're getting a slurry instead of a sticky, lump-like mixture, then your water might not be hot enough. After mixing everything together, we're going to cover the bowl with a piece of cloth and then set it aside to cool. We're going to work on our Poolish in the meantime. Here in a mixing bowl, I have 100 grams of bread flour, and I'll add 1 gram or about 1/4 of a teaspoon of instant yeast. And I'll give it a little mix just to disperse the instant yeast. Then we add 100 grams of water. And we'll mix everything together with a pair of chopsticks. The yeast you're going to want to use here is one for sweet bread dough formulations. We use about 10% sugar in this recipe, baker's percentage, which is pretty sweet. For more on yeast, make sure to check out my previous video on them here. We're adding instant yeast at an amount of 1% of the flour used for this Poolish. By the time the Poolish matures, the yeast will multiply and we expect it to be about 1% of the total amount of flour. After we're done mixing the Poolish, we're going to cover the bowl with a silicone cap and leave it outside for an hour to rise. Once the hour is over, by this time the Tangzhong should have cooled as well. So we'll cover it with a silicone cap too and put it in the fridge with the Poolish. I usually leave them in the fridge overnight for around 8 to 12 hours. Okay, now that our Poolish and Tangzhong have been left in the fridge overnight and are ready to be used, we can make our main dough. We'll begin by grating some garlic. You could also use a food processor for this, but it is a pretty small amount of garlic. We just want to make sure the garlic is very finely grated. We don't want any large chunks or bits. After that, we add 5 grams of this grated garlic to 30 grams of butter. Mix everything together and then we set that aside. We'll be adding this garlic butter to the dough after it's been mixed for a few minutes. This 5 grams of garlic is what we found to be the best amount to add in terms of flavor. It gives the bread a nice and subtle garlic taste. We found that adding more garlic can lead to an overwhelming flavor. Okay, after that, we're now going to mix together the dough. Here I have the step of mise en place already completed. I'm going to add in the Tangzhong first using my spatula, really getting in there. Then I'll add in the Poolish, scraping it all in, bit sticky. Following that, I'm adding 75 grams of milk, 45 grams of sugar, 7 grams of salt. And then before we add the flour, I want to mix everything together first. I'm aiming to dissolve most of the sugar and salt, as well as break up the Tangzhong and Poolish. This is going to help prevent clumps in our final dough, which is something that we absolutely don't want. After that, we're adding 260 grams of bread flour. We'll give that a solid mix, trying to get most of the flour incorporated into the liquids. This step takes just a minute, but will help prevent flour flying out of the bowl when we put it in the stand mixer. Okay, into the stand mixer it goes. I'm mixing it on medium now, and we'll let it run for around 4 minutes. It should eventually form a cohesive ball. For this recipe, it's really quite important to use bread flour. We're really counting on that extra gluten strength to make sure the dough remains stable and strong. After 4 minutes of mixing, we'll add our 30 grams of butter and 5 grams of grated garlic using a spatula. Then we'll turn the mixer back on and let this run on medium speed for another 4 to 6 minutes. The dough will start out very messy, but then should eventually become cohesive, eventually cleaning up the bowl like here. The key determining factor for the dough being done is whether or not it passes the window pane test, because that means the gluten structure has already been well formed. So after about 4 minutes, we're going to do a quick window pane test. If the dough rips before we can stretch it out thinly enough to see light through it, like here, then it's not done. In this case, we're going to let the mixer run for another 2 minutes, then repeat the test. Now that it passes, we can move on. With a bit of vegetable oil on my hands, I'm going to line them well and scoop out the dough from the bowl with the help of a scraper. I'm then going to oil the stand mixer's bowl to prevent the dough from sticking to it during bulk fermentation. For convenience's sake, I'm using the same bowl that I used to mix the dough, but you could use a different bowl if you'd prefer. I'll round out the dough and place it in the oiled bowl. Now we'll cover it, and we want to let it rise until it has almost doubled in size, which should take around an hour or so. This timing may vary depending on your climate, so make sure to keep an eye on your dough. After the bulk fermentation, we are going to divide and pre-shape. Then before we get it out, we're going to sprinkle a bit of flour on the work surface as well as on top of the dough. Just a little bit, just to make sure it's not that sticky. Then we scoop it out. We want to divide into 15 dough balls, so you can do that any way you please. Each dough ball should weigh around 54 grams. I'm dividing the dough into 3 first, and then each of those pieces into 5, just eyeballing it at first, because we're going to be weighing each piece so that they're equal. And after that, we're going to pre-shape them into little round boules. We don't need to do this too tightly. We just want to make sure that they're neat and have a slightly taut surface. So pulling the edges into the center and then rounding it in our palms. You may need a bit of flour at this stage. They're starting to get a little sticky due to yeast activity. Okay, once they're all done, I'm going to cover them and leave them to rest for about 10 minutes as a bench rest. In the meantime, we'll prepare our glass baking dish for the garlic bread by lining it with some non-stick coating. Just using a silicone brush, we want to make sure to get every nook and cranny going along the sides, across the bottom, so that the bread dough doesn't stick to the dish. Alright, we set the glass dish aside, and when the dough is done resting, we'll get straight to shaping it. Taking a piece of dough and using a bit of flour to dust it, we're going to flatten it to thoroughly degas it. Get rid of any potential air bubbles, really aiming to pop them. Then we pull the edges into the center, forming a tight little ball, using our palms to round it out further. And when it's smooth and taut, we put the dough into the already lined baking dish. We repeat the step for the remaining dough pieces. Although the garlic and Tangzhong actually have weakening effects on the dough's gluten structure, they may actually make the dough a bit easier to handle because they result in a stiffer dough that can be much easier to shape and work with. That is very much the case here, as you can see. It is a bit tacky though, so you might need to add a bit of flour here and there to prevent sticking. 15 pieces may feel like a lot, but once you've gotten the hang of it, time flies by. They'll be done before you know it. Make sure to keep the scraper handy though, just in case any dough sticks to the surface and you need to detach it. And make sure to pop any bubbles as you see them. Okay, when all the pieces are done, we want to cover the dish, both with a plastic cover and then a cloth. And then we'll let them proof for about an hour or so until they roughly double in size. Again, the exact timing depends on your room temperature, so make sure to adjust if needed. While the dough is proofing, we'll also take the time to preheat the oven to 185 degrees Celsius. When the dough is done and the oven has been preheated, we're going to top the rolls. You can skip this part if you're making the bread for burger buns, although you might still want to apply the egg wash. The first thing we'll do here is lightly score all the rolls. This is a little tricky because the dough can get sticky, but we just want to make a little cut down the middle to help the dough expand in the right way when we put the sausages on top. So just moving through them. And speaking of sausages, these are the ones I'm using. They're about 5 centimeters in length. You don't have to use small sausages. You could just take a regular sized one and then cut it into pieces to fit the dough. We want to put the sausages right where we scored the dough, pressing it down a little to really settle the sausage in. It's okay if this degasses the dough by a bit because it's going to spring right back up in the oven. I think this is a pretty fun part of making this recipe. It's so enjoyable to pop the sausages into place. Just want to really press down on them. After all the sausages have been added to the dough, we're going to brush it with some egg wash. The egg wash is just 1 egg cracked into a bowl with 15 grams of milk added to thin it out and improve the color as well. We mix the milk and egg together, and after that we'll apply it to the dough using a silicone brush. Just brushing on a thin layer on top of the dough, going around the sausage, coating all sides as best as we can, getting that nice golden brown color all around. Okay, that looks good. We're now going to add the final toppings, which are the sauces. I've got some mayonnaise, chili sauce, and mustard in piping bags, and beginning with the mayo, I'm going to top the sausage and dough with it, making a sort of zigzag pattern, aiming for an even topping of each little sausage bun. For some added flavor, I added some chopped shallots to this mayo. You don't have to do it, but I think it just adds a bit more zing to the taste. After the mayo, I'm adding the chili sauce. We like it pretty spicy, so I'm being generous with it here. Again, going in a zigzag pattern, but this time in the opposite way, contrasting the mayo. I just think it looks better like that. Finally, I am literally adding lines of mustard, just going straight down all the rolls. The combination of colors already looks very appealing, and I think the pop of yellow mustard looks really good with the red and white. Anyway, it's all going to be absolutely delicious, and that's what really matters after all. Finally, we're done with the toppings, and we're going to put the glass dish into the oven. We'll bake the bread at 185 degrees Celsius on bottom heat for 15 minutes before turning it to top and bottom heat and letting the bread bake for another 20 to 25 minutes or until it reaches the desired golden brown shade. Look at them pop up. And we're done. These mini sausage rolls are so soft and flavorful, and the toppings pair so well with the delicious and subtle garlic flavor of the bread. I really feel like the garlic adds to the complex flavor, bringing another layer to the already delicious sausage rolls. Again, you could add more or less garlic according to your preference, but these are just perfect to me. And that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and bye!